How are you there? We're carrying on from the previous video talking about the British attacks on Zimbabwe, the British antiques, and I'm taking you right into the secret files of the British foreign policy, the things that they don't want you to know. They don't want you to engage each other on. That is why they've even attacked my channel so that it doesn't spread, because they know that the things that I'm saying will liberate Zimbabwe. So as I'm saying that, as the Triple C people go to countries like Britain, thinking that they're going to help them set Zimbabwe free, that we've got no idea that those countries that you go to, or Triple C, they've got no intention of letting Zimbabwe to be free. On the contrary, they have got a history of desiring to destroy Zimbabwe ever since 1980, when the glory of Zimbabwe was expressed through Joshua Nkomo, who wanted the land to be given to black people. They made sure that they taught Robert Mugabe violence, who went around by the regions of Mashonaland, where Joshua Nkomo had a huge following, and be violent and spread this tribalism that tried to separate the Shonas and the Ndebeles, and even including going even further to do Gugurahundi in such to create a scar that will make Ndebele people and the Shona people not to be able to live each, to find it very hard to live together for quite a long time, of which now we have squashed it. And now, because the devil is a liar, it so happens that we actually do love each other, and those things failed to work. So what I'm saying is that the British foreign policy, secret foreign policy, has always been to make sure that Zimbabwe fails. First of all, the failure of Zimbabwe to come alive through Joshua Nkomo made or pushed the British government to put Robert Mugabe in power for the purposes of squashing the question on land. However, as I said in the previous video, Robert Mugabe presented a rare, peculiar case. A rare case, because he gave them this opportunity of destroying Joshua Mugabe Nkomo. At the same time, Robert Mugabe became a good educator, something which the Britain foreign policy makers did not like. Therefore, they had to destroy our industries and our education through things like SAP, and also through things like opposition parties that will make sure that ZANU-PF is always at its toes, fighting against opposing political leaders, and also fighting against its own people, creating a scarecrow really for ZANU-PF in such a way that, because of the violent nature that they'd already instilled in ZANU-PF from the 1970s and the 80s and the like, it followed, therefore, that in the 2000s Britain did not need to interfere much, because their violent creature called ZANU-PF had grown and become a man. It would begin to do violence on its own volition without the help of the British. Therefore, so it was this thing now, this attack on Zimbabwe was an autopilot through ZANU-PF, the ruling party. At the same time, Britain sponsors opposition political party like Movement for Democratic Change, to upset a bulldog that they have already made violent themselves, so that it will be able to unleash violence in the country, destroy state institutions, and bring in sanctions, so-called targeted sanctions, that they are indeed, they are targeted sanctions, but they don't tell you who they are targeting. They say that they are targeting state companies that are linked to ZANU-PF and individuals in Zimbabwean government. In actual fact, they are actually targeting Zimbabweans. They are targeting the Zimbabwean economy. They are targeting the Zimbabwean public. For what purposes? For the purposes of making sure that you Zimbabweans are not going to build a society that has got strong institutions and systems that can produce economically competitive and politically competitive outcomes for your people and generations to come. So in order to do that, they had to destroy the political infrastructure of Zimbabwe, that is through targeted sanctions that target both the Zimbabweans as a whole and also the politicians in Zimbabwe, unplugging them from the global financial system and the global political support system, at the same time sponsoring an opposition for their purposes of not expressing the desires of the Zimbabweans that were following Morgan Tsvangirai. The reason why the Britain was sponsoring Morgan Tsvangirai was not for the purposes of Tsvangirai to take over power. I tell you, if the British want a regime change today, they can get it today, but they did not want a regime change. They wanted to scare ZANU-PF with fears of regime change. And whilst in the all the time, Britain, even the United States, has never wanted regime change in Zimbabwe. I stand corrected, but I am telling you people that Britain and the United States have never wanted regime change in Zimbabwe. But what they wanted was to create a scarecrow through the opposition that will make ZANU-PF think that there is a regime change agenda on the cards, and therefore ZANU-PF will spring into its natural gear of being an oppressive state, unleashing untold violence on the people, destroying its own institutions for the purposes of power retention. So in the process, they are actually they are not doing what they're supposed to do. Their duty of building the country through these institutions. So you can see the weapon of the British through the opposition is very nefarious. They never really tell the opposition that we wanted to destroy Zimbabwe. No. They tell the opposition that we want to help you remove it from ZANU-PF from power because ZANU-PF is oppressive. At the same time, this oppressive ZANU-PF was built by them for the purposes of being oppressive, because the oppressive nature of ZANU-PF is what the British want it to be. When they put such targeted sanctions and saying that we are targeting you on these sanctions because of abuse of human rights and respect of not respecting the rule of law and corruption, in actual fact, they are lying. They do not want ZANU-PF to follow that. Imagine if ZANU-PF stop abusing human rights, if ZANU-PF stops being corrupt and start building its country, Britain will be angry. They will not want it. They use those things for the purposes of justifying their illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe that are detrimental to the livelihoods of everybody else in Zimbabwe. So you can see that the wicked guy here is the United Kingdom. So the biggest enemy of Zimbabwe, I've come to realize, is the United Kingdom, not ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF is just a guy who just caught up in the middle, not knowing what to do, not knowing what is forward, what is backward, what is up and what is down. And therefore, because they have been groomed to be violent, they do what they know best, which is violence. And they don't even know why they're doing that violence. Just like when they did Gugurahundi, they didn't know that they're doing Gugurahundi for the purposes of crushing the theology and the understanding that we need to take control of our resources. They thought that they were doing it for the purposes of power retention, because of Mashona, they're supposed to rule the country, because of Mandebere took their wives and cows. That was just a lie that the devil was spewing in their heads, when the reality of the matter was to crush the idea of the land question. And Joshua Mugabe Nkomo could not be able to go forward with that vision until Chanjerai Wozu did what it did violently. Chanjerai Wozu, who's also part of ZANU-PF, who's also part of the violent machine that Bilton has built. They did not know that one day their very own violent machine, which is ZANU-PF, that they've built through Robert Mugabe, will one day turn up against them through Chanjerai Wozu and the war veterans who were rightfully dissatisfied with the outcome of the Lancaster House conference, and therefore took their farms back from the former white commercial farmers, and that angered the British. Therefore, it led them to sponsor an opposition political party that will rival Zimbabwe. If Britain really cared about opposition politics and the people of Zimbabwe, why did they not sponsor Joshua Mugabe Nkomo during the time of Gugurahundi? Why did not help the forces of ZAPU to be able to overpower ZANU-PF in time? Why did they let the massacre in Matepeleland go on for years and years and years? It is because that is what they deliberately wanted, because Robert Mugabe was serving their purposes. Now, when the time came when Robert Mugabe's people, ZANU-PF, started to take their land, but the land from the white people by force, that is when Britain began to think of sponsoring an opposition political party, not for the purposes of removing the evil Robert Mugabe regime, no, but for the purposes of of countering that ideology that I told you about, that it is an ideology that that lived in Joshua Nkomo and through Zapu, and since it was crushed through Gugurahundi, it got to be resurrected again through the war veterans who took over their land, and therefore the British needed to come up with a new plan of how to counter that. That is when they begin to sponsor the movement for democratic change. Now, hear me very well. As I told you that this thing is very convoluted. I am not saying that Morgan Tsvangirai knew of all of these things. Morgan Tsvangirai rose just like any other opposition person who was dissatisfied because he was the leader of the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union, and therefore believed that because of retrenchments and all the other economic problems in the country, someone had to rise. So Morgan Tsvangirai was a hero for the people, but however, the United Kingdom began to take advantage of that position of the hero for the people and begin to prop him up, but not for the purposes of him taking over power, but just for the purposes of destroying the legitimacy of ZANU-PF and its ability to rule peacefully, not for the purpose of removing Robert Mugabe from power. We can underline that again. Not for the purpose of removing Robert Mugabe or ZANU-PF from power. We can underline that again. Not for the purpose of removing. In fact, I would like to posit to you that the ZANU-PF stay in power is because of the United Kingdom and its allies, and that is exactly what they want for Zimbabwe. They want Zimbabwe to be run by dictators, corrupt individuals who will never have the interest of the black people at heart, because Britain itself wants the people who do not have the interest of their own people at heart to rule that nation, to keep these people subjugated. Because at the same time, when we have got a country like Zimbabwe that have got conscious people that are very educated, it was important for Britain to destroy the institutions of education, the institutions of law, the institutions of the country itself, which is the governance system, so that everything else will just fall apart. If everything will fall apart, it wouldn't matter therefore that Robert Mugabe had a good education drive in the 1980s and 90s, because all that will go to waste. We'll have our headmasters and our doctors cleaning toilets in South Africa and in the UK, taking care of their old people, even though they are well educated to do much higher things. So that was actually an attack on the sovereignty of Zimbabwe. So you begin to see therefore that this regime change idea that ZANU-PF is always talking about, ZANU-PF is actually chasing shadows, because there is really nothing to chase. There is no regime change agenda that Britain has. But however, Britain wants ZANU-PF to think that there is a regime change agenda, when actually there isn't a regime change agenda, but it is there to make you to always stagnate and never be circulate. Because if you are circulate, you will build your economy, build your people. But because they target us, and you ask a question, why do they target us? It's very simple. It's because we're black. You see, this is actually a racist arrangement that Britain, United States, Australia, New Zealand, and all those white countries have. Have you ever seen political mayhem in New Zealand, political mayhem in Australia, or in all of these white countries? How come they are all stable? Do you know why they are all stable? Because the superpowers, including the United States, support stability in white countries. The superpowers, including the United States, support instability in black countries like Zimbabwe. So Robert Mugabe, who became a rising star, remember that Joshua Nkomo was going to be a rising star through giving people land. But when they crushed him and put Robert Mugabe, who agreed not to give people land, they thought that they had won, but Jehovah had another one on them, because through Jehovah, Robert Mugabe was able to educate his people. Now they had to come, then they began to have that problem of what do we do with these educated black Zimbabweans? The black South Africans are not that educated, black Zambians not that educated, the rest of Africa not that educated, but Zimbabwe have got there's this great engineer of education called Robert Mugabe, and therefore that posed a huge pain in the ass of the British foreign policy makers. They didn't know what to do about it, therefore they had to destroy the legitimacy and the governance of Robert Mugabe. They didn't want him to get out of power, but they wanted to incapacitate him in his ability to drive forward, to drive that education drive in Zimbabwe that will lead to a greater industrialization. That is why when the land was taken and it was taken haphazardly, and Robert Mugabe had to spend his energies, his political energies, fighting an opposition instead of building a country. So I've said before in the previous videos about that Mugabe in the 2000s spent too much energy and finances on financing power retention instead of building the society. The reason was that he was put in a place where he was not able to be to stay circled and build his nation, because there's always this constant threat of the British through the opposition that wants to take over power and erase the gains of independence that that came with the 1979 Lancaster House Conference. So therefore, he did believe ZANU-PF and the rest of the Zimbabwean government were really running away from a scarecrow. Yes, Morgan Tsvangirai was a scarecrow. If the Zimbabwean military was well advised at that time, they would have actually took the reins. Now, let me tell you how you take the reins. If you're a military, you don't go and do coup. Took the reins of the political climate and tell the Robert Mugabe we're gonna have an election. And if Tsvangirai wins, Tsvangirai becomes the president. And when Tsvangirai becomes the president, he is briefed on the security concerns of the country, so that he will still be Tsvangirai with the support of the people and so-called support from Britain. But at the same time, the military must make sure that our president knows that the country is here, there. This is our objectives. You can have relations with Britain, but our objectives are A, B, C, D for the purposes of building our sovereignty, keeping our sovereignty strong, and building our people. And in that way, the Britain will not know what to do, because their style or their plan really was not to remove Robert Mugabe. But if the military of Zimbabwe had to allow the 2002 elections to be free and fair, and Morgan Tsvangirai would have taken over, Zimbabwe would have gone forward without, and Britain would be left not knowing what to do. But what I'm telling you is that Britain actually always wanted ZANU-PF not to reform itself out of power, because these sanctions are not powerful enough to remove ZANU-PF out of power, but they are powerful enough to hurt ZANU-PF's ability to deliver on the deliverables that they are supposed to deliver on as as the leaders of the country. So the war rages on even up to today. Now that we have heard that Idi Mnangagwa, who really the worst of the corrupt part of ZANU-PF, this is the one that pillages the nation, ruthlessly taking everything non-stop for the purposes of personal wealth accumulation. And on the next video, I'm going to explain to you why is it necessary for ZANU-PF to hand over power to us as young people and run the country forward. I will explain to you why it will be no longer be wise for ZANU-PF to hold on to power. My name is Nkomo, and I am running for the presidency of the Republic of Zimbabwe, so that we can take away our country forward and away from the evil British hold on the economy of Zimbabwe. Holy is God.